So you've downloaded R, and now what do? Well, if you have a Windows machine, it's going to put an icon or two on your desktop. As you see here on my screen, up in the sky, there are two icons for R. On a Mac, you may have to search for it for the program, but once you find it, you can just choose one of these and double click, and you will come to a window that looks like this. If you have a window that looks like this, you have been successful downloading R. All right, so I'm going to just make this a little bit bigger so that you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to edit my GUI preferences, my graphics user interface, and I'm just going to make the font size a little bit bigger so that you can see what I'm doing at home on your screen. So R gives you some information about the site license, the version that you have. You can see that I have version 3.4.4, which they called Someone to Lean On. There are some interesting names for the versions of R. And then I have a cursor. So if I just hit enter right now, it just goes to the next line and gives me a cursor again. So R is waiting for me to tell it to do something. So how do we use it? Well, first, I'm going to just follow through the what's on the R help page. That's your first link in your Exam 1 material module in Canvas. It's called Download and Use R. So it's a little help file that I've compiled. So first, you can use R like a calculator. Now, I want you to get away from using your calculators, and I want you to start using Excel or R to do basic calculations, because when you are in the business world and you walk by someone's cubicle or office, you are not going to see them on a calculator. So I want you to try to get away from the calculator and start using software to make your computations. All right, so R can be used like a calculator. Let's say that we want to just do 27 divided by 9. So I'm just going to type 27. The / button is divided by, and the number 9. And I hit enter, and it gives me my answer of 3. Now notice this little 1 with the square brackets around it. That's just a counter. We'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, so let's say that I want to do 27 divided by 3 squared. Well, I can either do 3 asterisk 3 for 3 times 3 after the divided by sign, or I can do 3 squared. Now, notice that I didn't type anything. What I did was I hit my up arrow key in the bottom right of your keyboard, and that will scroll through your recent commands. That's going to be your friend, so pay attention to that. And I'm just going to hit the caret, which is Shift 6 on my keyboard, and the 2. And that caret is the sign in R for an exponent. So that's 27 divided by 3 squared, which again gives me 3, because that's 27 divided by 9. So R can be used like a calculator. The asterisk is multiplication, the caret is exponent, and the / is divided by. Plus and minus is already on your keyboard, so no need to go over that. All right, so what we'll be using R for this semester is working with data. So let's say that we want to create a data set. Well, I can type one in. R uses objects. So I'm going to define an object in R called data for my data set, and I'm calling it lowercase data. And I'm going to use the less than sign, which is above the comma on your keyboard, and the dash, which is right to the right of 0 on my keyboard. And that is how I'm going to name something in R. So that says data is, and I'm just going to have it concatenate a list of numbers. So the C, the lowercase c, is the concatenate call in R. And then I do a parentheses. And let's say that my data set is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. I just type those numbers in separated by commas and end my parenthesis and hit enter. Now it does nothing, which might seem unimpressive, but what you've done is you've created an object. If I type the name data, it will tell me what it thinks data is. It's a list of numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9. So good, we've got success. Now notice if I try to call data in with a capital D, it's going to tell me error, object data not found. And that's because I didn't spell it the way that I named the object. Capitalization matters in R. When you name an object and you want to recall that object, you have to recall it exactly the way that you named it. Now let's say that you can't remember what you named something and you've got your screen filled up with a data set or something and you can't see what you named it. You can check what objects you've defined in R by typing the objects command with an open and a closed parenthesis and hit enter. And it's going to tell me I have one object called data stored in here. Okay, so we've got a data set that we're going to work with inside that R help file. So I'm going to click on the download and use R link in Canvas and get to that page. And I'm just going to scroll down here and I'm going to copy and paste this line. So I'm just going to highlight it. You can either right click and copy it or hit Control C, which I'm doing on the Windows, or Command C, which you can do on a Mac. And I'm going to go back here to R and I'm going to paste it and hit enter. So this is a data set that I got from another textbook by Samuels and Whitmer. And it's a data set of glucose values. So I called it Gluc. I use short names because I don't like typing them in too much. And I can now work with this data set that I call Gluc. Notice that I named it the same way. Defined an object with my less than dash. I concatenated a list of numbers in parentheses separated by commas. The concatenate was that lowercase c. So I can do all sorts of things with this now. If I type Gluc, it will tell me what it has stored as my glucose data set. So I'm just going to go ahead and make my window bigger. There we go. Now let's talk about these numbers in the square brackets. Okay, so notice the first time that I called Gluc, I had my window smaller. It ended here, so it cut off the data set at 84 and went to the next line at the value 86. Well, what these numbers with the square brackets are telling you is what data point starts that line. So this line starts with the first data point, 81, and this next line starts with the 20th data point, 86. So this way you can get an idea of how big your data set is. Notice that when I called Gluc in the second time, I had made my window bigger. So now the first line starts with the first data point, 81, but the second line starts with the 27th data point, 115. So on your screen, according to how big your font is and how big the size of your window is, you might have different numbers sitting there, but that's what those mean. All right. A sneaky way that we can get the dimension of a data set, the sample size n, is to use, this is a vector, this is just a list of numbers, so I'm going to get the length of this vector. So I'm going to tell it I want the length of Gluc, and I hit enter, and it tells me I have 31 observations. So the length function is something that I use quite a lot, or dim. We'll talk about that when we work with matrices. Now let's say that I want to sort this from smallest to largest. I can use the sort function. So I can do sort Gluc, and it'll give me my same data set, but in order from smallest to largest. Now you can see that the minimum observation is 70, and the maximum observation is 131. All right, another function you'll use a lot is the summary function. So the summary function in R gives you the 5-number summary, which we'll go back over in your lecture. I know you learned this in your first stats class, but we'll go back over it again briefly this semester. So it gives you the 5-number summary, the minimum, the 3 quartiles, and the maximum, and then it also reports the mean. Okay, so it gives you the 5-number summary and the mean. That's what the summary function in R does. How about if I just want to calculate the mean? I can type mean of Gluc, and it'll just give me the mean. Notice it gives me a little bit more accuracy when I type in mean. Separately, 86.77419. When it was in the 5-number summary, it rounded it to 2 decimal places, 86.77. If I want to get the standard deviation of that data set, I use the SD function. and it gives me that it's 13.13446. Now, if you've had stats before that used hand calculations for the standard deviation, you will see that R is going to save you a lot of time calculating. We don't hand calculate things in practice, and this course is supposed to be one that teaches you to use statistics the way you would in the real world, so that is what we're going to focus on. All right, another function that you might use for various reasons is maybe you want to add up all the things in your data set. Well, I can just use the sum function for Gluck and hit enter, and it will add up all of those observations. So if I add 70 plus 70 plus 74, etc., all the way up through 131, it's telling me that that sums to 2690. All right, so that's a couple things that you can do with an individual data set. The sky's the limit. There are lots and lots of things that R will do, but we're going to start out slow with just some of the basics that will get you off the ground and running. All right, so now I want to teach you how to enter a sequence, because we'll use this when we graph things and throughout the semester. So if I want to create a sequence from 1 to 100 counting by 1, then I use the seq function, open parentheses. I'm going to tell it that I want it to start at 1, comma, end at 100, comma, and count by ones. And I hit close parentheses, and it will do a sequence for me. I could define that as an object. I could call that x. So name an object x in R, less than dash, and have it be a sequence from 1 to 100 by 1. And now it just stored it as an object. And if I hit X to see what that looks like, I've got my sequence. Let's say I want a sequence that counts by 2. I can use seq from 2 as my bottom number to 100 as my top, and I want to count by 2s. And hit enter, and now you can see that we've skip counted to 100 with even numbers. Okay. So that's some basics of some things that we're going to be using this semester. But now we need to talk about how to work with a whole matrix of data, a data set. Not just one list of numbers, but maybe a spreadsheet of numbers. Okay, so I've got this little example data set that we can work with called oil.txt, and it's linked in the R help file. So if you go back to Canvas and you scroll down to loading data sets once you're working through this, and you just click here for the data, it gives you this page and shows you what the data set is. And now if you just click on this little link, it will download the data set. So notice that it's gone in my downloads folder here on Google Chrome. I'm going to go back to R. And let's say that I want to call that data set in and work with it. Probably the easiest way to teach you to call a data set in is to name it something. So let's call it oil data. And I'm defining an object called oil data, so I'm going to use my less than dash. And I'm going to do read.table. This is a .txt file, so I'm going to use the read.table function in R. And I'm going to open my parentheses, and I'm going to use the file.choose command. Open, close parentheses. And I happen to look at my oil data set in that preview on Canvas, and it had column names. So I'm going to do comma, header equals true. Now make sure when you type this in that you put true in all capital letters. It has to be typed exactly the way you see it on my screen, or you'll get an error message. And I'm going to hit enter. And what the file.choose option does is it brings up a window so you can search for the data set. So I happen to know on my Windows machine that it went in my downloads folder. And so I'm going to look for my oil data set. I sorted it by date and I found it right here. So I'm going to double click on it. Now, how do I know that it called in that I grabbed the right data set? Well, I can type the name of my object and take a look at it, and we have success. I can see that the data set right here that was in a .txt file is called into R right here. So we have success. All right. Now there are other ways that you can call data sets in by actually pointing R to a path name, but I'll let you work through that yourself. It's described in the R help page. But for this semester, 99% of the time, the file.choose method is going to be a good way to call in your data sets. All right. So now, what do we do once we have a matrix called into R? Well, one thing that I like to do is check out the dimensions of it before I just type in the name of the object. You're going to be working with very large data sets this semester, and trust me when I say you don't want to fill up your screen with a 30,000 row data set. So one of the things I like to look at is the dimension. So I use the dim function, dim. And so I'm just going to ask R, what's the dimensions of my oil data set? And it's telling me 12 by 3. R always puts the rows first and the columns second. So 12 rows and 3 columns. And we can see that it has numbered our rows from 1 to 12. It didn't count the header row because we told it that that was a row of headers, of column names. And so we have our 12 by 3 columns data set. All right, now, if you find out you've got a very gigantic data set and you don't want to take up your whole screen with it, you might want to just look at like the first 5 rows. So what you can do to do that is you can type the name of the data set and use square brackets. And remember, you always put rows first and columns second. So let's say that I want to look at rows 1 through 5. Then I'm going to type 1:5, comma, and I'm going to leave, well, let me just put a number in here. So let me just say 2. So what do you think that's going to do? The rows are first and the columns are second. So what I've told R is to give me the first 5 rows of the oil data set for just the second column. So it's going to give me, in this treatment column, C, 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 E, E, because that's the first 5 rows in the second column. So let's see. There it is. It gave me C, 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 E, E. And because this is a categorical variable, it told me how many levels of that variable there are, that there's just a C and just an E showing up. All right. So lots of times what I'll do is I'll just want to look at the first 5 rows, but all the columns, so I get a feel for what variables I have in my data set. So how do you think we just get the first 5 rows and all the columns? Well, I could up arrowed, I could either change this to 1 through 3 since I now know it has 3 columns, but lots of times I don't know how many columns it has when I call it in. So I'm just going to tell it to give me all of the columns by leaving the columns blank. So this is specifying 5 rows, but not specifying any columns. And when I don't specify any columns, it's going to give me all of the columns. And so there you have it. The first 5 rows with all the columns of our data set. All right, now, how do I call in just one of these columns at a time? Well, we've got several options. Now pay attention because this is going to be your friend. Okay, so let's say that I want to call in just the type column. Well, one option is to type in the name of the data set and $sign to refer to the column name, which is capital T, lowercase y, P-E. And that will give me just the column called type. It gives me all 12 observations in the type column. Or I can refer to it as the first column in the oil data set. So I can type oil data, square bracket. If I want to just get the first column, remember the columns come after the comma, I can just do comma 1 to give me all the rows of the first column. And again, it gives me that same list that's in the type column because that was the first column. And I have a third option, which I'll be using in my examples as we go through the semester, because believe me, when we have longer lines of code, you won't want to type the name of the data set every time you're referring to a single column. So what I'll do a lot is I will attach the data set. So I'm going to do attach oil data. I'm going to attach my data set. And it doesn't say it does anything, but what this allows you to do is refer to a column with just the column name. So now I can just type the word type and it gives me all the data in the column called type in the oil data set. So if you use the attach function, it saves you time when you're having to type in commands to refer to specific columns of your data set. So now I can type in TRT to get what's in that treatment column, and I can type oil to get what's in that third column, my values for the oil measurements. All right, so now we know how to refer to individual columns. The last two things we're going to do are something a little more fancy, and this is going to help you with your case studies. This is going to help you with your projects and case studies, and when you need to manipulate data sets to just look at certain rows, certain columns at a time. The first one I'm going to teach you is the subset command. So let's say that I want a subset of my original matrix of data. And let's say that I want to only, so let me take a look at this data set again, just put it up on the screen for you. Let's say that I only want the oil data set where the type is WT. Okay? So how do I subset this data on a criterion like that? Well, I can use the subset command. So I'm going to name a new object, and I'm going to call it oil WT to just help me remember what I am creating. And I'm going to use my definition symbol, my less than dash, and I'm going to use the subset command. And what do I want to subset? I want to subset the oil data set. And now I need to put in how I want it to subset it. What criterion am I naming for it to subset on? And I want it to subset on the type being WT. Now I've attached my data, so I can just refer to it as the type column. So I want a subset of the oil data set such that type equals WT. Now the type column is a categorical variable. It's not a numerical variable. So I'm going to have to put two equals signs if I want to subset on a categorical variable. And then I have to put parentheses around the WT since it's a categorical variable. All right, let's see what my oil WT subsetted data set looks like. It should just be the first 6 rows because those are the ones that meet my criterion such that type equals WT. Let's check it out, and it worked. Okay. Let's say that I want to subset the oil data set such that the oil measurement is above 200. Well, I can use the subset command. I want to subset the oil data set such that oil is larger than 200. And let's see, oops, I named it, I overwrote my previous matrix. So now when I type in oil WT, I wasn't paying attention. So this is a good learning lesson for you to see. Now it's on my new criterion because I overwrote the old one. So now oil WT is this one right here where the oil column was greater than 200. This last little command there, call, made it greater than 200. And you can see that it just subsetted our original matrix such that anything in the oil column is greater than 200. All right, so that's the subset function. And now I'm going to teach you how to just, instead of creating a new object, maybe just calling in certain rows and columns to do calculations on. So let's say that I want to take the average oil measurement where the type is WT. Okay? So how do I get an average? Well, we already covered this. That's the mean function, right? Now, I could subset my matrix. Let me go back here. Let me go up to my oil WT such that type equals WT. And then I could take, what does that look like? That's that subset where type is WT. And if I wanted to get the mean oil measurement, all I would need to do is say mean of oil WT $ oil column, and it would give me the mean. Now, what would happen if I just referred to it as the oil column? I get a different number. Why is that? Because the only data set that I attached was the original full data set. So to get the mean of the oil measurements for just the WT types, I have to call in the column called oil in the subsetted matrix oil WT. All right, if you don't want to subset your data set first, you can just do this all in one fell swoop. All right, so my original data set is called oil data, okay? We've attached that so we can call in these column names just by the name of the column. So if I want to get the mean of the oil column, I'm going to use the mean function. That gives me my average. And I want to get the mean of the oil column such that type is WT. Okay? So the oil column such that type equals WT in parentheses. Remember, we have to do the two equal signs and the quotation marks because the type column is a categorical variable. And look, it gives us that 288.3333. Sometimes you might just want to subset your matrix and do it in two separate steps as you're learning R. That is absolutely fine. Speed will come later when you have to use R a lot, maybe in an internship or in a job. Right now, we just want to get you using R and getting familiar with it. So either one of these methods will work just fine. All right. Now let's get this a little more fancy. Let's say that we want to get the average oil measurement where the type is WT and the treatment is C. So how do we add another criterion in there? Well, we can use the up arrow so we can edit our previous command. And I'm going to go in here inside my square brackets. That was like my such that. That was my criterion. And I'm going to add the ampersand symbol. That's above the 7 on my keyboard. So I want the mean of the oil column such that type equals WT and treatment equals C. And now it gives me the mean of just those three observations, 333.6667. Now I can see those three observations sitting there, so I can take the average myself and just double check that it did what I asked it to. The three observations where the type is WT and the treatment is C are these three right here. So it's 334, 287, and 380. So 334 plus 287 plus 380 divided by 3, and you can see that it did that for us. Now on a smaller data set, we can do it by hand like that, but on our big data sets that we'll be working with, you're going to need to learn to get familiar with these functions. You might have 5,000 observations that you need to add up, so you definitely don't want to be doing it by hand. Okay, that's all outlined in the R help file, and you can work through that slowly on your own and also complete the little R quiz that will help walk you through some calculations and get your confidence up using R. Good luck.